Hi, it's Steve from PartSelect. Today we're going to show you how to change the door gasket on your refrigerator, and it's a really easy job. All you're going to need is a 5/16 nut driver, a 1/4" nut driver, and a 9/32 socket. Let me show you how we do it. Now, there are basically two methods to replacing the door gasket on this refrigerator. You could do the job with the door still attached to the cabinet, but I prefer to take it off so that I can put it on a suitable work surface and it makes the job a little bit easier. Now, if you take that method, you'll need to empty all of the bins on both the freezer door and the fresh food door, and you should probably turn the refrigerator off while you're doing that job because it won't serve any purpose to have it running with both doors removed. So begin by popping the hinge cover off the top, and we're going to remove 3 5/16 screws that secure that upper hinge. Now we'll simply lift the freezer door off at the center hinge, and then we can set that aside. Now with the freezer door removed, we can lift that insert for the center hinge off, and then with a 9/32 socket, we'll remove that center hinge pin and support the door as you pull that out. We can set that aside. Remove the plastic spacers from the bottom side of that hinge. Now we can tilt that out far enough that we can lift that door off, and we'll set it on a suitable work surface so that we can change the gasket. Now that we have the door on a suitable work surface, we can begin by lifting the gasket away from the inner door liner, and you'll note that there's a number of 1/4" hex head screws. We need to remove all of these and set them aside because we will be reusing them. And while we're taking those out, it's a good idea to take the new gasket that you received and either set it in a tub of hot water or put it in your clothes dryer or soften it up with a hair dryer, because it will have taken some kinks during shipping, and we want to get it as soft and pliable as possible when we go to reinstall it. Now that you have all of these screws removed, we can now peel that gasket out from underneath the inner door panel. Now it has a formed portion that fits into that inner door liner that may be a little sticky, particularly across the bottom of the door. If there's been any spills, it will tend to stick in that. Now, we can discard the old gasket. Well, first we'll loosely lay the gasket around the inner door panel, and then we'll next insert each of the corners into position. Tuck that gasket in underneath the door liner. You may have to stretch it a little bit in each corner. And make sure that we tuck this portion of our gasket in underneath this raised rib on the inner door panel. So you may need to lift up on the liner in places and then roll the gasket in underneath it from the outside. And just carefully work your way all the way around the perimeter. Tuck it in underneath the liner. We don't need to be too fussy at this point. Once we start putting some screws in to hold it in place, it will become a little bit easier. Next, I would suggest that to install a screw somewhere near the center on the top or the bottom. And again, make sure that the gasket is tucked up in underneath that door liner. You don't need to tighten the screw, just enough to hold the liner from moving around. And before we put one in the corner, we'll again check and make sure that the gasket is formed right around the corner. And we'll put a screw as close to that corner as possible. We'll do the same thing on the opposite corner. Again, make sure that they're not tight, that just enough to hold the liner in place. And we'll do the same thing on the opposite end. And then we'll move to each of the corners on that end. Now we can concentrate on the sides, and again we'll start by putting one close to the center. First of all, make sure that the gasket is tucked firmly underneath the liner, and then we can just move our way along that side. Put one a little closer to the corner. Always make sure before we tighten any of those screws that the gasket is tucked firmly in underneath that liner and is not folded over anywhere. It should form a nice smooth seal with the outer door panel to the gasket. And we'll just continue along that one side until we have all the screws inserted, not tightened, but just bottomed out enough to hold that in place. And we'll make sure that the corners are nice and square and that they're not stretched. Now, once we have all of the screws in place, we'll just go around and tighten them all securely. Again, just double check, make sure we don't have any kinks in that gasket. And once they're all tightened, you may note some deformities in that gasket, and if they're still sitting in underneath the liner all right, we'll just take a hair dryer and apply some heat to it very carefully so that we don't overheat the liner or the gasket, just enough to soften it up, and then you can shape it as required. Once we have that done, we're ready to put the door back on the refrigerator. Now, to set the door back in place, we need to line up the bottom hinge pin with the opening, and then we'll just swing the door into place and let the gasket hold it steady. We'll slide the plastic spacer washers into place. And we'll insert that center hinge with our socket. We'll tighten that into place. Now, before we put the freezer door back on, we'll set that plastic insert over top of that center hinge pin. And again, we'll line up the hole in the bottom of the freezer door over top of that hinge pin. Swing it into place. We'll lift that top hinge over into position. Make sure the spacer gasket is in place. We'll reinsert those 3 5/16 screws. We won't tighten these screws yet until we have all 3 of them in position. You may need to pull back on that hinge to lift the door up a bit to center those screws. Now, before we tighten them, we want to ensure that the gap between the freezer door and the fresh food door is even all the way across, and that the door lines up with the top of the cabinet. Then we can tighten them securely. We'll reinstall the hinge cover. Just slides on from the front and then snaps down over the back. Next, we'll reload both doors, and if we turn the refrigerator off, we need to make sure that we turn it back on. And your repair is complete. I told you it was an easy job. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your repair.